Hello from Falmouth, Maine. My name is Megan Eiler, and I did my project on the Variola virus, also known as the smallpox virus. It's a member of the orthopox virus family. It infects only humans, and it causes smallpox, which when smallpox was around, it killed 3 out of every 10 people that it infected. The morphology of the Variola virus is it has large brick-shaped virions. It is a double-stranded DNA virus, and it's approximately 220 to 450 nanometers wide. Now, symptoms of smallpox included high fever, head and body aches, sometimes vomiting. You get a rash in your mouth and throat, which would turn into sores. Then you'd get an all-over body rash. The rash turned into pustules, which eventually scab over, and you're only not contagious when the last scab falls off. Now, as for transmission of smallpox, it's not as easily transmitted as other things like the flu. You basically have to have prolonged face-to-face contact with someone who's infected, where you're somehow ingesting or inhaling their respiratory droplets. You can also get sick from their contaminated materials like clothing or bedding that may have their scabs or fluids on it. There's no known effective treatment for smallpox. There are some treatments that they will try to use if there was an outbreak. As for control methods, historically, we've used variolation, where you're taking a small bit of the virus and then inoculating it into yourself to build immunity. In ancient Asia, they would blow scabs up your nose or snort scabs. Europeans and Americans didn't do that. They would inoculate via puncture wounds. And then in 1796, as we know, Edward Jenner created the first vaccine using cowpox, which developed an immunity in a small boy to smallpox. Now, the World Health Organization announced that smallpox was completely eradicated in 1980. As for the history of smallpox, we don't know where it came from. It's been around for at least 3,000 years because we've seen evidence of it on ancient Egyptian mummies on their faces. And my favorite history here is the Civil War, and that's why I chose the smallpox virus, because I love learning about the Civil War. And something I learned is that soldiers died more from disease than they did from bullets or battle wounds, and one of those diseases was smallpox. It wasn't as widespread as things like the measles or dysentery, but people were so afraid of getting it because it had a high death rate. Approximately 40% of all Union soldiers who got smallpox died from it. Now, official regulations required that troops in the North and South, all get vaccinated, but this was often bypassed because they didn't have enough vaccine to go around for all the soldiers, or because they were in such a desperate need of manpower out on the battlefield. So they were rushing troops through the enlistment process and bypassing their vaccinations. Now, soldiers were afraid of getting smallpox, so a lot of them decided, well, they're going to inoculate themselves or try to vaccinate themselves. So they would see, get another soldier who they thought had smallpox. They would use anything they had, dirty pocket knives, rusty nails, anything, make a deep wound in their skin, and then take the pus or scabs from the sick person and put it in their wound. And as you can imagine, this led to terrible infections like erysipelas, and even syphilis, because sometimes those sick guys didn't actually have smallpox, they had syphilis, and so they were actually using material from their syphilitic chancres. And this wasn't the only thing that was spreading disease in this way. Actually, the army hospitals were also doing it. Ideally, the vaccine for the soldiers would come from crusts from pustules from cows or calves, but also they were getting scabs from vaccinated babies and children. And sometimes, I guess, when they couldn't get those, they were getting vaccines from vaccinated men who did have syphilis or other diseases. So they were also responsible for spreading the disease. And this led to a lot of people back home, being terrified of vaccination because they were hearing stories of soldiers being having amputated limbs because of bad vaccinations. And there was just a lot of fear propaganda against it. And I just want to say real quick that also prisoners of war on both sides, in the North and South, were vaccinated in the camps. And the worst camp is Andersonville POW camp in Georgia, about 3.5 hours away from Brunswick. And one of the war crimes that the commander of that camp was charged with was bad vaccinations of the prisoners that led to their suffering and deaths. And with that, I conclude my project. I could talk a lot more about it, but thank you for listening.